Welcome to The Deepest Cut, a podcast about the movement from painful experiences to meaningful music. I'm your host, Matt Connor. As it turns out, sharing your story isn't always a straightforward exercise. The moment you begin to write or sing about someone else, you hit the wall of responsibility. How do you handle the sharing of someone else's details? What's an appropriate level of vulnerability? How do you honor both the truth and the way of sharing that information that might impact the life of your neighbor? And what are your expectations from even sharing it at all? These were just some of the important considerations and difficult questions faced by three sisters, Lisa Nicole, Andrea Baca, and Danielle Torres, together known as the Grammy-nominated group Out of Eden, as they wrote and recorded a song about their father. On this episode of The Deepest Cut, I sat down with Lisa and Danielle, two-thirds of the Dove Award-winning trio, to discuss their song Rolling Stone, which you can find on the group's 2002 release, This Is Your Life. The song's a difficult one, addressing familial issues that they wanted to explore in their music in an honest and authentic way, but doing so within the confines of the music industry and the stickiness of interpersonal relationships wasn't so easy after all. After nearly 20 years since their last studio album, Out of Eden is back with new music, new energy, and a new perspective on their craft. But for this episode, they were gracious enough to take a look back at an older favorite to detail one of the more difficult songs they've ever written and released. Here's our conversation with Lisa and Danielle of Out of Eden. Hello and welcome to The Deepest Cut. My name is Matt Connor and I'm your host. I'm just so thrilled to be sitting across from two-thirds of the group, Out of Eden. 30 years this year, by the way, right?
Yes.
Celebrating the group's incredible legacy. All the way, I remember getting press releases and hearing about that first album from Goatee in its nascent days. I'm getting into the weeds already. First of all, I'd just love to hear from you. How are you? Love to introduce yourselves here on the podcast.
Sure. My name is Lisa Nicole. Matt, thank you so much for having us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, my name is Danielle Torres, and ditto what my sister Lisa said. We just have been looking forward to this, listening to some of our songs and just thinking through what they all mean to us. So we're grateful for the opportunity.
You both are so kind just to sit down with us and join us here for one of our season 2 episodes. Obviously, we want to talk about Rolling Stone, which is the song that we're going to be highlighting. But before we get into that, I actually want to go back to what you just said, Danielle, which was we've been re-listening to the catalog. And one of the prompts that we give artists is to find the song. That here on The Deepest Cut, we ask artists to venture into what is the song that's been the most difficult or maybe the most painful that you've written that you'd at least love to publicly discuss. And so I'd love to pose that question to either one of you and say, what was that process like to even identify that song? Can you take me into that? And was that an easy choice, not an easy choice?
Well, let me start on that one because Lisa actually writes most of our songs.
Sure.
So when we started, we were all teenagers. So our catalog, six records and greatest hits, and all of them are just us growing up, us experiencing the world, us growing in our relationship with each other, with the Lord, romantic relationships. So it's all in there. And I think because we've never shied away from writing about real world issues, we've really been very honest with what we're going through in our music. So it was a little strange, honestly, to go back with that lens of what were we dealing with when these songs were written and what kind of frame of mind. I remember some of the songs that we didn't even choose. I just remember they happened in hard times as a teenager and thinking about the crying and listening to our own songs and how it would be ministering to us. We didn't even choose those songs. We chose another one. So that's light work. But it was very interesting going back through and reliving some of those moments.
Yeah, I agree, Danielle. I think having, so grateful to have such a catalog of music, and also kind of growing up in a time where, now you can just release single after single after single, like it doesn't really matter. Then, singles were much, it was a more serious process, like releasing a single. So we have so many deep cuts and so many songs that fans would be like, oh, play this one, or, do this one live. And also kind of the songs that were the most painful to write and the ones that were the most difficult to write, that wasn't always synonymous, because sometimes for me it was easy to write about pain, or easy to write about heartbreak, because that was the outlet that we had. But I think of a song called Sarah Jane that we had on our Love, Peace, and Happiness record. And we're trying to write about social issues. And just in Out of Eden, we came across so many different areas of brokenness in our fan group and peer group, and trying to write a song about that wasn't like cheesy, that wasn't giving some pat response like, it's all going to be okay, don't worry. We're talking about really deep socioeconomic issues, and trying to give words to that. Like, that was more difficult to write. But we're going to talk about Rolling Stone, and I think that came from was more painful, I think, to write about. So it was interesting kind of trying to figure out which direction to go.
Can you take me into the craft of that in general? You said, sometimes writing from a place of pain isn't really that difficult. The assumption there for me would be, is it because the emotions come pouring out, and there's just kind of a, like once you're bleeding, you just keep bleeding in that way?
You just, yeah, I think, and I'd love to hear Danielle. Danielle used to write like really dark poetry as like a teenager. I'm just going to put her on blast. So I'm interested to hear her perspective as well. For me, I think if you are willing to start from a place of honesty, and that's kind of how I think we chose to deal with songwriting. Whether or not the song would see the light of day is not the primary thing, but the primary thing is be honest. And I think when you're willing to just be honest and just put the words to the page, however they come out, it's not difficult. I think what starts getting difficult is when we start to edit our thoughts, or try to, question, is this okay? Like, can somebody handle this? Is this too honest? And those are all like, legit questions that I think we have to ask sometimes. But for me, the process of just writing it out is not the hardest part. It's going back and editing and figuring out, does this make sense? And, is this going to help someone? Is this, something that somebody can relate to?
Danielle, what do you say to first the dark poetry, and what would you add to that?
I'd say first off, that's embarrassing.
She was our Poe. She's the Poe, Edgar Allan Poe of the group.
Yeah, I was definitely into Edgar Allan Poe, punk rock, metal, all the things. But growing up in the spotlight, like when we first went on tour, I was 13, I think. Our mom, was very supportive of our music, but we had a stepdad that wasn't so supportive. We had a lot going on behind the scenes. There was a divorce happening. So we're stepping out on this huge arena tour, 13 years old, dealing with, parental figures getting a divorce. It was a lot. And so I had no idea how, like, where do you put that as a 13-year-old getting up there and being like, Jesus is the answer, and believing that, but also experiencing some real turmoil and chaos and, just puberty and all of the other things, but in the spotlight. I remember like young people or people older than me would come up to me and be like, hey, like I'm dealing with this problem, or they'd have these really serious questions, or be dealing with thoughts of suicide, and ask us. And we're like teenagers looking at each other at a signing autograph table going, oh my goodness, like we're not mature enough for this. So a lot of that came out in my poetry writing, and it was like completely opposite from what I was experiencing in the spotlight. My poetry was very dark and rough and like kind of violent, not in a self-sabotage way, but just like a lashing out at the world way.
Sure. Was it hard to feel space for that you were going through behind the scenes of no one in the industry positioning you in that way? It was like this bright, young, familial, like there was even like a familial cute factor to it, right? And then you're describing, I guess, when did you feel that you maybe started to get a grip on some of that yourself? I mean, did it take a couple of albums? Like, did it take longer than that?
Yes. I mean, I think it was somewhere probably between our second and third album that just all the things that we had been singing about, all the things that we had been wrestling with started to make sense for me in my own life and my own relationship with God. I actually wrote one of the songs that I did write was a song called Praise You. And it's reflecting that whole time of feeling so empty and just like you had nothing to give to God in prayer, nothing to give to others, and then coming to that realization really that God really was everything for me. And so that's where the song Praise You came about. But it did take a while. I was probably somewhere between like 15 and 17 when it all started clicking, and I felt like I could be really honest about who I was.
Yeah, I think too, I think we're still, I think in CCM music and even gospel music, like still not fully comfortable with rawness and with not having the answers. It's like because we know the answer, it also means that we have to have the answer. And in reality, sometimes all we have is knowing who the answer is. And that can go on for days, it can go on for weeks, months, it can go on for years. But I think in our industry, there's this like wrap it up real nice and like put a bow on it. And like, it's gonna be okay. Like, don't get too sad, don't get too. And so I think we wrestled with that in songwriting, like wanting to be really raw and wanting to be really real, but also this kind of, you can't be depressing, like, lighten up, folks. So, I think we try to find that balance and fulfill kind of both poles, if you will. But it's difficult to kind of wrestle with that for sure.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it especially if you're an act going for radio, there are gatekeepers, there are, those considerations that you just have to give to the song of and you got to distill it down to 3 minutes and
Right.
right. I mean, so you have these experiences. You're saying later on we were wanting to write honestly about social issues, things that we're seeing, experiencing, feeling. How much of that were you able to negotiate in ways that you felt good about? And how much of that were you like, you know what, I don't like some of the trades that we're having to make or some of the cuts of, leaving things on the cutting room floor? I mean, was that when we talk about vulnerability and when we talk about honesty in that way, what was that path like for you in such an early age?
So our first record, we were heavily working really, really closely with Toby Mac, Todd Collins, and Joey that did formed Goatee Productions and then later Goatee Records. So learned a lot about the craft of songwriting from Toby. I mean, I think he's one of the best. And as the further away we got from our first record, the more they trusted us with our story and with our ability to write songs. And I always felt very supported as a songwriter. I always felt like we were free to be and say whatever we wanted to say. I think they would give us honest feedback and even the critique of, well, this may not work at radio, but you're more than welcome to do it. And so then we were able to make our own choices. And so we could have on, the same record, Window, which is really like, bright and sunshiny, and a Praise You. I think those are on the same record. I'm not sure, but
I think so.
that is a little more introspective and, worshipful and kind of, a little sad. So they really allowed us to make those choices. which I'm really grateful for.
I do find it interesting. I remember early days, we were told like the rules of Christian radio. So it's like you can do what you want, but if you want a radio single, you can't ask the question. Like we couldn't say things like, "Are you there, God?" or "Why is this happening?" It had to, like, everything had to have a neat little bow tied around it, and it could only be said in the form of an answer, like, "You are the way," never like, "Are you the way?" That makes sense. So those back then were like hard rules for radio. So some of our songs were like, we make the choice to put it in question form, but we already know like this isn't going to go to radio. And so, like Lisa said, we did have a really good mix, I think.
That's great that you're given those like permission to include some of those things in there.
Yeah, yeah. And we got, so if I could just say, we got a lot of feedback, I think, from our listeners that really kind of bolstered our faith in ourselves in that sense. So we would get letters from, this is when people wrote letters from people saying, I'm going through this, or we would meet fans in the audience and then they would write to us. They would have these like really serious life altering changes and things going on. And at the time, I didn't know enough about like discipleship to go, okay, well, let me get you, go to your church and find somebody to disciple you. Like we would be the contact person for people all over the United States and abroad. And, being on the phone with people, like counseling, totally unqualified, but just like counseling people and, we trying to direct them to their church or to like a real therapist or that sort of thing. But that having those touch points with people, I think really fueled our desire to write honest music and to write music that addressed what they were going through. We would even use some of those stories in our songs, and we would get a lot of feedback about how our music, like being honest and asking questions and showcasing pain, like how that helped other people. And so that really was, fuel to keep going.
Boy, that's great. I mean, it sounds like it informed you in a meaningful way, and yet what a burden to place on.
Yeah, for 18, 19, 13, 14-year-old is crazy. I mean, I can't imagine. My daughter's 13. I barely want her to go walk to Chick-fil-A by herself. Like, I can't imagine like her just being on a 65 city tour with, like basically strangers and no parents. Like,
That has to be surreal if you have a 13-year-old to look and go, like to have that experience and go, this was my age 13 year, and here's,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, like my sister Danielle was literally 13 on the DC Talk tour, performing every night,
Wow.
going out to sign autographs and getting on our little Chevy van and driving to the next city. It's wild to think about.
Let's talk about Rolling Stone. I know there were a couple songs that it came down to. What is it about Rolling Stone? Can you take us into the context and maybe why this, you would identify as more difficult or more painful than others?
So for me, and this song was both difficult and painful. It was painful because we had to think about past pain. It wasn't a current state of pain, but we had to really think about past pain and think about our childhood to be able to write about this song. We wanted to write about our dad. And I think if I tried to like go back in my memory, but this song, there was a sermon that I heard that was preached by a man who never knew his father. And he was just talking about, just how God stepped in and filled that role, like how, and how he views the Lord, and kind of breaking down the difference between what we consider to be basically like, our earthly father gives us this one picture of God, but if our earthly father, even if he's awesome, like he falls short, and in what ways like God is different. And so it triggered the thought to kind of share our own experience, but we had to go back and think about that experience to do that. And we didn't want to do it in a way that was dishonoring to our dad. We had been reunited at this point and had a relationship, but that wasn't always the case. And so it was like, how do we honestly tell this story without just disparaging his character or something like that. So it was difficult, but I wanted to do this one. I think Danielle was on the same page, and I'll let her speak for that. But because it is such a prevalent concept, and I think this is probably one of the songs that we had more feedback on from more than any other song, I think.
Yeah, this song was really interesting. First off, it was shocking to me that Lisa wanted to even write about this. Growing up, I had no real memory of my biological father, and we were reintroduced to him when I was like 15, something like that. For me, it felt like the first time because I didn't remember, when I was like 1.5 or whatever, which was probably the last time I had seen him. And then over time, God did this wonderful restoration with our relationship. And we were getting closer. My mom still didn't really talk about him. So it was an avoided topic. I'll put it that way. And so for Lisa to want to write about this was like, wow, we're going there. It did feel like that, the great uncovering of something. So when she said she wanted to, though, I was on board for sure, because I had heard so many people that were dealing with the same thing. And she was closer to our father even from when we were super young. So she had more of an emotional connection to it. Whereas I had more of an emotional connection to how would this affect our mother? And telling this story, would it reopen wounds in her? I don't know that she's fully like, she doesn't like the song. Put it that way.
Yeah.
She'll say things like, I love that record, except that one song. You get real serious about it. So I can't say that we fully discussed it, but we know she doesn't love it.
Sure. The song's on your 4th record. So obviously you'd had time to kind of go through the process of writing, recording, releasing, clearing the slate several times of what do I want to talk about? What is it that we want to say? What are we going through right now? Does that feel like the kind of thing that you couldn't have written before then because you needed to kind of maybe develop the craft to know how to even unlock that door in a way that was going to lead to something? Or
That's a great question. I think with the This Is Your Life record, we had kind of solidified ourselves as a group that wasn't going anywhere. In a sense, like we had kind of like proven ourselves. We had done, I think like Window and River were like both like #1 on CCM radio for like 3 weeks each. And we had, sold, a significant amount of records. We had toured, we had done all those things. So This Is Your Life record, I feel like that was a record where we started to take risks, musically, more risks, I'll say, musically. And I think that touch point with our audience and being even more aware of our mission, Out of Eden was kind of gifted to us in a sense that we didn't go on Star Search. We didn't we didn't really have to work. We worked really hard while in Out of Eden, but it really was something that God just brought to us. Like, yes, do you want to do this? Or no, do you not want to do this? And so we kind of developed our purpose along the way. And I think by the This Is Our Life record, we had grown up a bit. We were more mature. We were starting to, deal with different life things ourselves. And so I just feel like it all kind of came together that we were able to uncover some deeper topics.
Was that difficult to, because some of the scenes in the song are pretty like vivid, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the very questions that you're asking as a kid. going, like
Yeah, like where where are you?
where are you? What's wrong with me? Like citing your own sort of search for validation and love and support, and then it's not there.
Yeah.
On this side of that, like how in touch did you feel with that? Because also within the song is your sort of direction toward the hopeful side, right? Like the healing that God can provide. I guess I just wonder, like, does the song reach you in a different way later on? And how much do you still feel in touch with that, with the girl who's asking those questions?
I mean, for me, it's like I talked to my dad 2 days ago, and before we wrote the song, before there was restoration, that would have been impossible. So when I hear it, I mean, it can be difficult to remember those moments, but I hear so much restoration. I don't personally remember the pain when I hear it. I'm mostly in awe of where our relationship is now and what happened over the years to get us to this place where I can talk to my dad every week. A man that I did not know, that was a completely different person. He's not that person anymore. So when I hear it, yeah, there, when we were thinking about coming on this podcast, yes, having to relive those moments of pain, but overall, it just feels like a testimony to me.
Yeah, I agree, Danielle. I think it feels like a testimony, and I just listened to it, and I think the longer that you live, the more you experience Rolling Stones in your life. It may not be your father, it may be a job, it may be, a teacher that doesn't, like you in college. It may be, a career that you want that escapes you. And there's always that opportunity to be disappointed. I think life has its way of just bringing disappointments. And so to me, I could sub that out with a myriad of things, but also know that the same way that the Lord brought restoration in that relationship and brought hope in that relationship, and the same way he brought us through that is the same way he's brought me through all the other things. And you start to learn that it's not necessarily putting a bow on it, but God actually can do like incredible things. And so for me, it's just it's a testimony of what God did in that relationship. And it's just a testimony of just all the, million little miracles that I feel like we've walked through in our lives.
Which, as you said, is what makes it so resonant with other people.
Yeah. Because it may not be a father for somebody, but it could be something.
Love that. Well, we'd love to have you introduce the song, and now that we've been talking about it, I'm sure listeners are like, "Let me hear it," or hear it with a fresh sense and context.
Yes. Well, this is Out of Eden, and this is the song Rolling Stone that we've been discussing. And I hope that after hearing this story, it resonates with you, and that wherever you are in life, whatever your Rolling Stone is, that the Father can and will get you through it. This is Rolling Stone.
Sitting on the front porch, waiting for you to come home. Visions of reuniting in my head. Only bittersweet memories, no holidays, no Christmas trees, broken promises I've got instead. How I used to wonder, where did I go wrong? How you could have stayed away so long. Thank God for my mother, hers was no easy song. Thank God that he showed me how to get along. My papa was a rolling stone, abandoned us and left us alone. And how it broke my heart at home, had me losing faith. Somebody saw what I went through and understood happiness. So glad they introduced me to my father. Your story sounds a lot like mine. It's a story told 1,000 times. Someone hurting leaves in disarray.
You've been listening to The Deepest Cut, part of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. Audio production and theme music by Isaac Vining. Logo and identity work by Meg Cook. The Deepest Cut was created and hosted by me, Matt Connor. Thank you so much for listening.